Welcome to another program in our series, Free Thinking Forum. It's my delight today to welcome the Commissioner of Human Rights, Kevin Lindsey. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us. You've got a big responsibility here in Minnesota. How did you prepare for this job?
Well, Bill, first off, I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you talking a little bit about the department. My background, I'm educated, trained as an attorney. I came to the Twin Cities in 1991 to practice law and enjoyed that. I've had a chance to also volunteer in a wide variety of different areas. I used to serve on a board which dealt with issues concerning individuals with disabilities. I also serve as, and still do, as one of the commissioners for the St. Paul Public Housing Authority. In that capacity, it's similar to sort of as a board member on a nonprofit board. We meet once a month. It is not my full-time avocation by any means. But those issues as relates to housing, dealing with issues with people with disabilities, and practicing law in the area of employment, it gives me a rich background for the work that I have to take on as a commissioner.
Good. And now, what is the Department of Human Rights role and mission? What does the department do?
The mission of the department is to make sure Minnesota is discrimination-free. The department was created...
That's a big order.
That is a big order. The department was created in the late 1960s, and if you take a look at the Minnesota Human Rights Act, it identifies three primary duties for the department. The first is to investigate complaints of discrimination, and that can cover a wide variety of areas, such as education, or healthcare, or employment, or what we refer to as public accommodations, when someone goes into a hotel or a restaurant and seeks to use the goods and services purchased there, or when they decide to go into a government and they decide to use public services. The second area in which the department has responsibility under the Human Rights Act is to ensure that the state's contractors provide equal employment opportunities. So that means hiring choices. So we seek to ensure that the state contractors, and there's a few of them, are hiring in a fair and equitable manner. And then the third one is we seek to use education, conference, and conciliation to try and make sure that discrimination does not occur in Minnesota. And that takes us into a wide variety of different areas. That's just in the Human Rights Act.
That is a big order. And who is protected under the Human Rights Act?
Everyone actually is protected under the Minnesota Human Rights Act. So this...
Even visitors to Minnesota?
Well, if you're a visitor to Minnesota and you decided to go and use a restaurant, and the restaurant owner for some reason denied you service, then you would be protected as a visitor coming to the state of Minnesota.
Well, and let's see now, a recent Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, does that mean that someone who is in business cannot decline to serve a person who in a same-sex marriage?
Well, in the state of Minnesota, Minnesota has denied discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation actually for several decades. So when people think
we were one of the pioneers then.
That is correct.
Good.
So when someone is denied the use of a good or service which is sold to other members in the public, and you decide that you're going to treat individuals because of their sexual orientation differently, that is a violation of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. We've actually had a couple of cases on that very issue. Not many, but a couple.
Now, I hear some claiming in other states that that's kind of religious discrimination, that the person serving, it's violating his own religion by serving them. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think first off, it's important to ensure what we're talking about as the interaction or the exchange. So we're not talking about a situation in which the state is declaring that you need to replace this minister with that minister of a particular
Good.
Or we're not talking about the government coming in and saying the way in which you worship within your house of worship needs to change. What we're really talking about is when we're in the public square and we're selling goods and services to one another, do we want people to be able to say no to some on the basis of an immutable characteristic or on the basis of their sexual orientation? And we're in that public space, then government should be able to regulate within that area. And this really goes back even to the 1960s. When we start thinking about some of the things which led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and African Americans weren't able to travel throughout the South because people would say they didn't want to serve African Americans. And sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes they would even say it on the basis of their religious beliefs. So this has a long history within our country.
Well, I'm glad Minnesota was a pioneer in dealing with this. Could just anybody file a charge of discrimination in Minnesota? Is that are there any requirements?
So I talked a little bit about being an attorney. So if someone felt that they were discriminated against and they wanted to file a lawsuit, they could do that. They could go, we're in Hennepin County now, they could go to Hennepin County, but that would cost them some money to actually file what we would refer to as a complaint in Hennepin County District Court. And it would be about $400.
But you have a complaint inquiry form, don't you?
Well, now we're talking about actually using the court system in that first scenario. But let's say that you were a person of limited means, or you didn't want to incur the expense of retaining an attorney. Maybe you were going to try and see if you could resolve this, maybe amicably or through mediation. You might come and file a charge with our department. And the difference is that that would be absolutely free.
Oh.
Now, we would then conduct an investigation. If we found that there was merit to your charge of discrimination, we could issue what we refer to as a probable cause determination, which in layman's speak means we think that you're right under the law. We would then have a conversation with the other side, and then we would seek to settle the respective dispute. So the Department of Human Rights for the state of Minnesota is kind of more of an informal tribunal or an informal sort of court process. It doesn't cost anything to file. A lot of the individuals who come there are individuals of limited means, and they really seek to try and resolve something in a relatively short or expedited manner.
Good. That's what happens after someone files a charge?
Sure.
Is there more to say on that?
Well, I think one of the things which is interesting about when someone files a charge of discrimination is that sometimes we'll look at a particular case and we will say that on its face that we see discrimination. That's not going to be something which would happen in a court system, right? So there the judge is going to allow the parties to provide some information to him or her before that they go forward in a court proceeding. For us, and I'll give you a couple of examples, we've had situations over the last couple of years where people have been denied a service animal in their restaurant.
Oh, when they have a service animal because they're blind or deaf or something?
Correct. So when they go into the restaurant owner, not aware that they should provide an accommodation to that person, tells them that they won't serve them within the restaurant. So we've had a couple of those charges. We'll have an informal conversation with the restaurant owner. Sometimes we'll bring the two parties together in the same room and we'll seek to resolve or settle the dispute at that point in time. So for us, we feel that we can be very flexible in trying to resolve disputes.
Good. And what kind of discrimination? Well, first of all, how long does it take for the department to investigate a charge?
Sure. So it varies. One of the things that I'm very proud of is the work of my staff over the last 4 years. When I started as commissioner, there were actually some cases, because of, I would say, historical funding within the state, that were as old as 850 days.
Ooh, that's a long time.
850 days. And when I was looking back as relates to the number of charges that we were investigating at that point in time, we were averaging around 250 charges a year. So the good news, and I'm happy to be able to share that with you, is we've now quadrupled our efficiency in investigating charges of discrimination. So last year we were just short of 900 cases which we investigated, And we have dramatically reduced the length of time. So now we have cases which are in the 200s as it relates to days of investigation.
Only 200 days.
Yes.
Good. So what kind of discrimination seems to be happening the most, and the results of these most cases?
Sure. So again, the most common type of discrimination which occurs within our department, which we investigate, is an employment discrimination case. So a situation in which someone is terminated on the job, is refused an offer of employment, or might be provided or not provided a reasonable accommodation on the job. So those employment type of cases. Now within employment, which is about 60 to 65% of that 900 charges that we investigated last year, when you look at those employment cases, the most common ones are disability, then followed by age, race, and gender. So not probably a surprise.
Old age, young age?
Well, that's a good question. So in the state of Minnesota, under the Human Rights Act, once you reach the age of majority, which is 18, you are able to bring an age discrimination action under the Human Rights Act. If we were in federal court, there is an act which is referred to as the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, and you have to at least be 40 years of age in order to bring a claim for discrimination under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act.
That's quite a difference.
That is a big difference. So, and we do have some cases where individuals feel that they're being discriminated on the basis of their age, and they have a claim, or they have a claim under state law, but they would not have a claim under federal law.
Now, I understand the legislature recently amended the law to expand protection against discrimination in some areas. What could you talk about that?
Yeah, so in the last couple of years, there's been a couple of developments which have occurred. I'm going to talk first a little bit about ban the box.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so this is
About felony?
Yes, that's exactly right. So it's about individuals under what we refer to as the Criminal Rehabilitation Offenders Act, which is right next to actually the Human Rights Act. So that law has been on the books for quite some time, and here's what I mean by ban the box. The idea on your employment application that a government, such as the city of Plymouth, could not ask individuals to disclose a criminal conviction until they at least gotten to the point of saying, we want to interview that person, or we want to give them a conditional job offer. And that had been the law in the state of Minnesota for about 6-7 years. About 2.5 years ago, the legislature amended that law and gave us the responsibility for ensuring that private employers did not ask information about criminal background until a conditional job offer had been made, or at least you had decided to interview that person. Now, there are some exemptions under the law for certain employers because of either federal or state statutory responsibilities to ask the information prior to extending an interview or conditional job offer. But other than that, if someone sees an employment application, they could contact our office. That's a violation of the law. Then we seek to ensure that those employers don't do it. So that's one expansion of the responsibility of the department under the law beyond the Human Rights Act. Now, as it relates to the Human Rights Act, this past session, there are a couple of big changes, actually. The first relates to women in pregnancy accommodations.
Oh, yes. I interviewed the woman that was behind that legislation just a few weeks ago.
Okay. So in that area, one of the unique novel things what the Minnesota legislature did with the Women's Economic Security Act is that they now allow women to go to their employer and ask for accommodation, such as being able to use the restroom more frequently, be able to take more water breaks, or deciding that they don't want to lift more than 20 pounds until they deliver the child. Those changes under the law really make Minnesota unique because those accommodations don't exist in other states
Really?
unless the woman can show that she would meet the definition of being an individual with a disability.
Well, I don't consider pregnancy a disability.
No, but that's the way, unfortunately, the law has been interpreted as it relates to the Federal Pregnancy Discrimination Act.
Really?
Yeah,
So we're in the forefront again.
we are in the forefront again on that respective issue.
And I understand that this change in the law carried over to female in correctional care. Is it? Are you aware of that one?
Well, there are other changes under the Women's Economic Security Act. You said we only have 30 minutes. I may have to come back and talk about the other changes.
On to more things.
Well, there was also familial status, which I think is also a very big issue, though. I do want to share with your listeners on that.
Okay, yes.
So on that one, to the extent that someone needs to take care of their spouse or their child, employers can't discriminate against the employee when they seek to do that. So that was a new change. Familial status was a protected area as relates to the area of housing discrimination. Mm-hmm. Now it has been extended to employment. And I think the legislature really sees and understands that there's a need to ensure that employees aren't discriminated against because of responsibilities to take care of their loved ones.
Good. Well, we make room for love here in Minnesota. And now I understand that a lot of your cases, 20%, involve something like reprisal. Wow. Could you talk about what that is and how the Human Rights Act protects against reprisal?
Yeah, so when we say reprisal, what lawyers are referring to is preventing individuals from retaliating against someone.
Yeah.
And in the last 20 to 25 years, we have seen in the federal courts and in state courts a dramatic increase in the number of retaliation claims being brought against employees. And
increase? I would think it would decrease.
Unfortunately, it's not the case.
Oh.
So the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission at the federal level, if you look at their strategic initiatives, this is one of the 7 strategic initiatives that they have, is to really focus on and try and reduce retaliation claims which are occurring in the workplace. So for us, we do see about 20% of our cases are retaliation cases. And it's important, not just if you claim discrimination, but if you support a friend of yours in the workplace to file a claim, or you participate as a witness, you are also protected.
Well, that's important for people to know.
I think that
they can help out a friend who's being given a raw deal.
No, that's very important.
Yeah.
I think one other area as it relates to that, which is closely related, is individuals who are undocumented workers.
Yes.
So sometimes we'll have a situation in which someone is an undocumented worker. They also are protected under federal law and state anti-discrimination statutes. So it was an unfortunate case on the facts, but I was glad that the staff did a great job investigating it. It was a situation in which a woman was subjected to sexually suggestive comments and activity by her male supervisor. And she initially was under the impression, because she was an undocumented worker, she couldn't come forward. But fortunately, some of the folks within her workplace were aware that she could, and then she brought the charge to the department, and then we were able to address the situation.
Good. Now, are there other agencies that also investigate charges of discrimination? Is your department unique?
Yeah, so most people in the state of Minnesota know that there is a Minneapolis Human Rights Department and a St. Paul Human Rights Department. Those agencies are limited to the boundaries of those respective cities. Mm-hmm. The subject matter area in which they investigate is pretty similar to the department's subject matter jurisdiction. Now, the interesting thing about the department, when you think about federal agencies, is that we sort of act as similar to like the Department of Justice when we investigate claims of discrimination in education, or again like the Department of Justice, public access issues, or we act as the Housing and Urban Development federal state counterpart when we investigate claims of housing discrimination, and we act as a state counterpart for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in employment. So yes, those 4 federal agencies from time to time might participate in investigations, but they probably don't have the same level of resources that the State Department has. And when we seek and we work in those other subject matter areas, we're acting very akin to sort of the federal agencies.
Now, since there is a Minneapolis and a St. Paul human rights office, does that mean that you get less complaints to handle from those areas?
No, unfortunately, that's not the case. The caseload for the Minnesota Department of Human Rights is probably 3.5 to 4.5 times as much as Minneapolis and St. Paul combined.
And that's statewide.
Yeah, and then when you take a look at the state, there's 87 counties in
Yeah.
the state. When I last asked staff to examine which counties we at least had one active file in, the number approached 70 counties.
70 out of 87 counties?
Yes.
Wow. So, do you believe that things are getting better in Minnesota in terms of discrimination?
On some issues, I do think that we're getting better. I think that we have to be honest with ourselves to say that there are still other issues out there for us to address and really combat.
But there's some signs of progress.
Well, I think the conversation which we had as relates to photo ID a couple of years ago, and we had the opportunity to sit down with folks from the Plymouth Human Rights Commission here locally and talking about that. Minnesota, again, was one of the few states was actually able to defeat that photo ID. And I think it was really on the strength of understanding the history of how people have been denied opportunities to the ballot box. So I'm very heartened by that.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I worked on civil rights in Selma, Alabama, and Jackson, Mississippi, and Iowa, and now here, and worked on helping defeat that requirement of voter ID.
Well, I really appreciate your respective effort now and then.
Are you seeing different types of cases that it might have than you might have a few years ago? Is discrimination now happening in different ways?
I think one of them, and I'll go back to the ban the box for a moment. So people understand intuitively that people maybe should be given a second chance.
Yeah.
But I think most people are seeing that and not really appreciating the tinge of sort of race and ethnicity, which also factors in as relates to when we decide to give someone a second chance. There's a professor named Pager, which did a study as it relates to individuals who've committed a crime and the intersection of race. And not surprisingly, someone who might be white in the United States is probably going to get offered an opportunity to come back for an interview more often than an individual who's African American or Latino who has committed a crime. But what Professor Pager found in her study, which has been replicated several times and actually has been cited by both Bush and Clinton administrations, is that the white applicants who have committed a crime are getting called back far greater than blacks and Latinos who have not committed a crime.
Really?
Right.
That
So that's the other half when we talk about still needing to work on some respective issues,
Yeah.
and we've got issues to deal with.
different types of cases
Right.
happening in different ways.
Right.
Are there sometimes policies and practices that might not be designed to discriminate but are still illegal because they result in discrimination?
Yeah, so the issue of using criminal history information is an example of one that might be neutral on its face. We might decide that we'll have a business and we'll decide that we're not going to hire any individuals who've committed a misdemeanor in the past. Well,
Wow, that rules out a lot of folks.
that rules out a lot of people, and it may have a disparate impact as it relates to people of color.
Yes.
So to that extent, how we look at neutral policies on its face and being able to deal with discrimination, that's really the new frontier. There's a case, Texas Inclusion Communities, recently issued by the Supreme Court in the area of housing, which was talking about disparate treatment. And I think that's where Justice Scalia wasn't too happy with that opinion, as I recall.
Now we just have less than 5 minutes left, so I want to
Yep.
get what advice would you give someone who believes they have experience discrimination? Should they just call your office, or?
They can call our office. One of the changes which we've done is to really try and meet with the individual right away, and if they have a claim, to actually prepare a charge of discrimination on the spot. If we need to get some additional information, we stay in contact with the person, but we try and get that issue resolved within a week of getting at least a charge filed. And we get a host of questions on a wide variety of areas.
So the advice, do you advise people in Minneapolis and St. Paul to go to their city first, or?
Well, they can come to us if they feel comfortable. If there is some reason why they don't feel comfortable, they can come to the Minneapolis Human Rights Department or the St. Paul Human Rights Department.
Yeah,
Any of us will do
whichever city
it.
they live in. Yeah.
That's correct.
So what advice would you have for employers? We just got about 3.5 minutes, so employers who could find themselves faced with a discrimination charge.
So again, going back to one of the 3 primary duties, it's education and conference is one of our 3 primary duties. So we go and we put information to help employers comply with the law on our website. I also go out and do training.
On your website, and I think we see that up on the screen now.
Well, I appreciate that.
And so employers and others could learn how to avoid discrimination.
No, that's exactly right. And we also provide a host of training. So I have gone and talked about service animals, assistance animals, to try and help businesses understand what their roles and responsibilities are, how to conduct an investigation concerning sexual harassment. I did a training for employers a couple weeks on that issue.
Now, it seems like we've covered an awful lot of ground in a short time here, but are there some other issues the department is concerned with where you play a role in?
No, I really appreciate the question. So Governor Dayton just recently signed a Diversity and Inclusion Council order.
And what's that?
So what that seeks to do is we seek to try and increase diversity within employment within state government, diversity suppliers, so the people that we contract with to try and increase that. And then the committee that I chair is called Civic Engagement. So one of the things that I have found and had heard from my predecessors is that sometimes historically disenfranchised communities don't believe that government is listening to them.
And I've heard that before.
Not that you might. So how do we create a way for this to be a continual process? Instead of just simply coming to the Latino community when there's a hot button issue, how do we really create a culture, a dynamic that we're always engaged with that community? And that we see that they have solutions and they're not just simply problems. No. So that's really the effort that we're undertaking, and I'm really happy the governor is allowing us to play that role. We're also trying to end homelessness and sort of serving on that task force.
I've worked on that too.
Well, I saw, so I better mention that.
Yeah.
So there's 8 agencies which are working on ending homelessness, and we're part of that respective process. There's an issue on workforce alignment, because we want to try and ensure that the Twin Cities region stays economically vibrant, and we have some people who are disconnected to various employment opportunities.
We've just been judged the best state in the nation for business, haven't we?
I think that that's right, and there's no doubt that there are some very good things economically which are going on within Minnesota, and this could be said for other strong economic areas. But there's still some people who are disconnected to those employment opportunities, and employers know this. They understand that if they can solve their labor shortage and create a vibrant, strong, highly skilled workforce, that's where you want to be.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Commissioner Lindsey, you've given us a good deal to think about.
Yep. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, and thank you for listening.